What is up, my friends, my Squarespace friends? In today's tutorial, we're going to build a timeline component just like this. We're just going to use HTML, CSS, and a code block to put all this together. It should be very quick, very simple. However, if you don't like code, if you don't want to jump into the code, or you're handing this off to a client, or you just want an easier way to do this, I have a plugin that allows you to build it however you want, build a timeline component. You can change a bunch of these different settings, and this content pulls from a blog collection, so it's really easy to update. All you do is update the content of the blog collection, and you can be off to the races, running. Just grab and go code. You just don't need to do anything. But today, we are going to build this component. So let's jump into that. So I am going to build this out in CodePen, just in a new CodePen area right here. We'll build it out in the HTML and CSS, and then we'll port it over here to our Squarespace website. So let's get started. All right, so the first thing we'll want to start with is probably just a timeline container, right? Just something that will hold our entire timeline. So we'll just give it a class and call it timeline. And then we'll want a bunch of timeline items within it, right? So let's give this a class that's timeline item right in there, and we'll put some content right in here. And we'll repeat this multiple times for as many different timeline items as we want. But we'll also want the timeline, the actual line, right? That line that goes down, right down the center. Class equals timeline line, right? We'll position this right in the center. Okay, so our timeline item, what's it gonna have? Well, it needs the dot. We need that dot, so let's give that, let's create an element for that. A div with a class of timeline dot, and then we had the card, like the card that holds the timeline. So I'll say div, we'll say class equals timeline card, timeline card. So this item is going to go full width across, and then within that item we have the card that'll be on one side. These cards are going to be what's going to alternate, and the dot is going to be what sits on the timeline. So this is our general structure, and we are going to duplicate this multiple times for as many different items. But let's also add some content within the card. So we'll probably have a heading element right within the card. We'll say timeline item 1. We'll want a date, maybe. We'll want a date. We'll say Jan 1st, 2023. And then we will give it a description. We'll say this is my description for the timeline card. And we can also throw like an anchor link in here if we wanted to read more. We'll give it an href. So there we go. So this is our general setup, and we can duplicate this. Let's say we want 6 items on our timeline. So I'm just going to duplicate this 6 times. We'll go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And is that actually 6? Yeah, that was 6. I said 5, but I didn't count the first one. So there we go. This is our general structure. We have our 6 items right here. I'll just toggle all of these up. We don't need them open. Something didn't close off right here. Okay, let's see what I did here. Something's messed up. So we have our timeline card, open and closing anchor link. That's great. This one's closed, but something is off. So we have our timeline item dot. There we go. Yeah, I mean, this is looking good. Oh, maybe we just didn't format it correctly. Yeah, there we go. That was it. If you highlight code and just hit Shift Tab on a Mac, it'll format it, get us all formatted there. So there we go. So here is our 6 items. So let's start just throwing some background colors on things. That's what I find easiest, just to start understanding how the browser is initially laying out all of our content. So I'm going to say timeline. We'll just create with our timeline item, right? Timeline item. And we'll say background. Let's give it a light colored background. Let's do EEE, right? That'll just be like a light gray. Okay, so here's our timeline items. Now let's look at our timeline line, right? Timeline line. I want it to be the height, the full height of our timeline container, because I want it to go the full height. Let's say the width maybe 4 pixels, and say background black. How about that? Let's see what happens. Okay, so nothing's happening because we haven't positioned it anywhere. So let's just say we'll want to position it absolute because this will allow us, here it is down here, this will allow us to position it just sort of anywhere we want. It's not just going to sit in the normal flow of the document like all of these. We can sort of overlay it on top of everything else. But we don't want it down here. We want it positioned up top. So for us to position it, absolutely relative to the container that it's sitting in, we have to make our container a positioned element. So I'm going to say timeline, just timeline, and say position relative. And now that we've positioned, we've made our timeline a positioned element, we can absolutely move around our timeline container within this timeline, our timeline line within the timeline. So let's just say top 0. You'll see it pop up there. Cool, cool, cool. We'll say left 50%, then transform, translate x negative 50%. So this is just a centering trick. If you have an absolutely positioned item, throw these two properties on it. It'll center it up right in the middle. Okay, so this is looking pretty good so far. Now we have our timeline dot and our timeline card. Let's throw our background on the timeline card now. Because our whole item doesn't need to be the background. I want my card to be the one thing that's alternating on each side. So I'm going to remove it from our timeline item and say timeline card and give that a background. So it's still going to go full width. By default, our card is going full width, but let's fix that. I don't want it going full width. So let's just say 50%. So there we go. Let's give some padding around it, maybe 17 pixels of padding. Okay, so there we go. And you can see by default, now it's going further than full width. Why is that happening? That is happening because we've said 50%, but the actual width, the calculated width by the browser is our 50% plus the 17 pixels on each side, right over here and right over here. It's adding that to our 50%. So in order to prevent that, calculate our padding within whatever width value we give it. Let's say box sizing, border box. So that's just going to say calculate the sizing within the border box, everything under the border, like our padding as well. So that's what this is doing. Okay, so now we're good. What we want to do next is alternate our items. So our first item, third item, fifth item. We probably could change all those. I'm not going to, we'll just do those as we go through, just because that'll be easier. But there we go. So here's our first 3 items. I want to alternate these on either side. So I'm going to grab the alternating every other item, every odd item, first, third, fifth, and I want to position its content on the right side. So let's say timeline item, and we can use the pseudo selector nth child and pass it in a value of odd. So this is going to grab the odd children with that are a timeline item. So right here. So now within that, I can select the timeline content and say, let's say left 50%. And probably nothing's going to happen because we have to make our timeline, content, this is card, because we haven't made this a positioned element. So this left property isn't going to work. So I'm going to say position relative, make that a colon, semicolon. There we go. And so now we have that alternating effect. Now I don't really like it right on this line. That doesn't really look too good, right? So we want to give it a little bit of spacing. So the width, we don't want the full width to be 50%. We want it to be maybe something like 47%. And now we have the spacing here, but we just need to push this over, not 50%, but 100% minus the width, 47. So that's 53. So now we have our spacing around there. So it would look good if we had a border radius. Give it some curved borders a little bit, maybe 5 pixels on there. And then sometimes it looks good to do a border, like a little bit of a darker border around these colors. Not fully black like that, but the background is EEE. Maybe we did just a little darker than that. So like CCC. And that gives it a nice little effect there. There we go. Okay, so now we want to add in our dots, right? So we have our timeline card that's kind of set. We've done those. Now let's target our timeline dot. Let's just throw a width. Let's just a width and a height, and then a background color so we can see where it is. So I'm going to say width 12 pixels, height 12 pixels, background blue, and it's going to be by default these are square. So here we go at the top left of each container. And then say border radius 50%, so it's a circle, and let's make them a little bit bigger, maybe 15 pixels, right? There we go. Okay, so you can see by default these are positioned. So this is what we call in the normal flow of the document. By default, the content down below it is going to be pushed down because this has a size and a height. This has a height. It's going to push down the content. It's not going to overlap. But if we say position absolute, that is what pulls out an element from the normal flow. And now the container, it pays no mind to the size of the absolutely positioned element. And so now we can move this around. We can say left 50%. We can do our same centering trick. Left 50%, then transform, translate X 50%. Right there. Throw that on. And now it's right there in the middle. So we probably need to change the Z index of this. Let's see if this will just pop it above our, there we go. So that popped it above. And that's good. So, but let's add a border around it because that would look nice. Maybe a 4 pixels, solid. And we'll use our, like a darker color. And then this blue looks horrible. So let's say white. And we could definitely go a bit smaller here now too. All right, so we are moving right along here. So what do we need to do next? So right now, this looks good on desktop, but on mobile, that doesn't look very good. It kind of squishes. What would be nice if on mobile, this line moved to the left side over here and everything just stacked on top of each other. We didn't have this alternating thing. So let's create a media query, say max width. 767 pixels. And now we want to do a couple things. First, we want to target our dot and our line. So we'll say timeline line. We want to move that to the left. We want to target our timeline dot, and we want to move that on top of the line. And then we want to make sure we want to sort of null out this. We want to, excuse me. We want to make sure the width of each card is 100%. And then each timeline item is just positioned to the left as well. So let's add all of those in timeline card. And we'll add timeline item up there as well. Okay, so timeline line. We want to unset our transform property that we did. Transform. Unset that. We want to say, so now you see it's kind of off kilter there. It's not very good. Left 0%. Let's just say 0. And boom, now it's over there far on the left. We want to do the same thing with our dots. But that's going to be right on the left. So what I want to do is based on the width of our dot here, which we know it to be 10 pixels, plus we have 4 pixels of border, so 14 pixels, right? So our dot is 14 pixels, or it's 10 pixels, 4 pixels on border on each side, so 18 pixels. So we want to move our timeline over, I guess 9 pixels, is that going to be right? Oh, that wasn't it. Maybe it's 7 pixels. Yeah, maybe it is just the 4 pixels. 14 divided by 2. So there we go. So now our timeline is set on the left side. That looks good. Timeline item. So this is the full item. What was wrong with? Oh, we're alternating. Oh, actually nothing. We don't need to do anything with the timeline item. That's going full width across. So our timeline card, we're just gonna say width 100%. 100%. I want to say left. Yeah, right. So we aren't going to want to do width 100%. We'll do left 0 to offset that. Left 0%. Oh, okay. So right now, this is not going to work because this is a single selector right here. and we're saying left 0%. However, there is multiple selectors on this CSS rule. So this is going to override, because we have multiple selectors, what we have down here. So I am just going to say, I'm just going to copy that whole line, and we'll put it down here. So that's going to, but again, this is for the width too. So we want our timeline cards, every timeline card, we want that to be width 100%, right? And then our odds, we want them to be pulled over. Okay, so there we go. We want everything, now let's say left 10%, left 10%, that would look good maybe. Not 100, left 10%. And then let's just make the width of these cards 90%. Okay, so there we go. So now these are kind of pushed over 90%. So let's get some spacing in between these items, because that doesn't look very good. What we could do is turn this into a grid component. So our timeline, I can say display grid, and that gives us access to this gap property. So I can say gap, right? And that's 17%, 17 pixels, and that'll give us a little gap between all of our items, and it'll also be the same on here as well. We have a little bit of a gap in between those. Kind of nice, kind of nice. Okay, so we're pretty close to being done here. By default, the browsers add in some margin around our heading, the top and the bottom, so I'm gonna get rid of that. I'm gonna say timeline item, so our H3, that's our heading. I'm gonna say margin top 0 pixels. See if that pops up. There we go. Yep. And then margin timeline, we'll say P last child, because that is our description right down here. I'm gonna say margin bottom 0 pixels. And that should pull it up on the bottom as well. Okay, so there we go. We're sort of fixing a lot of our spacing issues. Now let's get those little hover effects. Let's do that. So let's pull this fully the height we want. So our cards right here. Let's give this a box shadow. Box shadow. We'll say, let's just do 5 pixels, 5 pixels, 5 pixels, HSLA. I use HSLA format for these. It's my favorite, much more than these. It's just hard to understand unless you've been using colors for a long while. It's hard to understand what these go to. But hue, saturation, lightness, alpha, that's a little bit of an easier one to remember if you just get that terminology down. So this is just going to be fully black. So if we said 1, you'll see we have this super dark background. But if we give it a little bit of maybe like 1%, that gives it a nice little blur effect. We can make it a little more blurry by making that 8 pixels and maybe drop these down to like 3 to pull it in a little bit more. There we go. So that looks good. Now what I want to do as we hover over our timeline cards, let's transition. Let's change timeline card hover. Let's make our box shadow a little bit, let's pop it up, right? So I'll say, we'll change our box shadow. That's why I copied it in there. But we'll also use our transform. We'll say translate Y, maybe like -5 pixels. So we'll move it up. There we go. And now let's make, as we move it up, let's also make our box shadow a little bit darker, maybe like 0.17. Not darker. That's probably not really what. Oh, that was way too much. That might be the reason. So there we go. That changes it a little bit, and we could also pull this out a little bit more, or keep that at 8. Pull these out to like 5, like how we had earlier. There we go. So it kind of looks like it's popping up a little bit, but we'll add a transition on our timeline card that we're going to transition the box shadow. 0.3 seconds ease, and we'll also add a transition for our transform form. 0.3 seconds ease. And now we have a nice little subtle transition effect. That looks pretty good. That's a little darker than I want, maybe 0.14, right? There we go. Okay, so we're set. We've built out our little timeline component here. Now what we want to do is copy this into Squarespace and just do our final tweaking just to make sure everything looks good. So let's do that. I'm going to copy all of our HTML. Let's open up a page. Let's add a code block. Adding a code block in. Paste it in. There we go. Here's all of this with the styling that comes with our Squarespace websites. Part of the reason why it's so beautiful to use Squarespace. Things just work right out the box. I'm going to copy that CSS, paste it in here, and there we go. Okay, so generally it's in here, but obviously this isn't what we want it to look like. So our heading is still being colored by the section that we've had, the color theme of our section. It's still getting, all of this is getting the same color. So we want to change that. I want to change this, our line style, change that color a little bit. So let's just adjust some of these styles. Let's adjust some of the color. So the timeline background, I'm going to use current color. So current color is going to be the color of the paragraph text for that section. So this current color property is great to use because it will adjust based on the color theme that you've pasted this component in. So I'm going to use this for a few things. I'm going to use current color for this. Maybe we'll use current color for our border, our dot border. So where's timeline dot? Where's our border? Down here. That might look good. There we go. The background, let's make it darker. Let's use, so I can jump into the custom CSS or jump into the web inspector, and we can look, if I select the section border element right here, this might be more than what you want to do, but we have access to this variable, the site background color variable. So this is the exact color of the background of whatever section we're using. So I'm just going to copy that and put that as the background here, our var site background. And now that will match whatever the site background color is. And I'm going to copy this, and we also might want to use this site background color as the text color of all of the items within all of the text pieces within our card, right? So here's our card, timeline card. That's our hover effect. Let's just do another timeline card. And I'm going to use the dot or the star. And if we have this is targeting every element that is within it, every single element, no matter what it is, header, paragraph, divs, whatever it is, color, and then I'll just put that in there. And there we go. So now we have this beautiful little timeline component that looks amazing on desktop as well, or on mobile. Okay. So there we go. This is it. This is what we have built. I hope you have enjoyed this. I hope you've learned something even more. Coding can be fun. If you want more customization options, again, my tutorial, my plugin over here, it allows you to place the date in different areas. You can change the date type. Again, this is just pulling from a blog collection, so you're not having to jump into the HTML or CSS or change any of that stuff. You can change the spacing really easy on this little builder right here. However you want to do that. Very simple, easy to use, copy and paste. So get that, check it out. If you enjoyed the code of this, I have a Code Curious membership. It's $12 a month. You get all sorts of premium code snippets and tutorials and newsletters, and it's amazing, if I do say so myself. But there we go. That is this. Thank you so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed this. Let me know if you have any questions, and have a great day.